On the night Liam Bennett finally understood who he was about to marry, Seattle was drowning in rain. It was not the soft kind of rain people write songs about. It was heavy, cold, and relentless, the kind that turned the streets into black mirrors and made the lights of the city tremble on the pavement. Cars crawled through downtown with their headlights blurred. The harbor cranes in the distance looked like sleeping giants, half hidden behind sheets of water. And along the waterfront, where the city's polished skyline gave way to old warehouses, chain-link fences, and loading yards, the world felt almost abandoned. Inside the back of a black town car, Liam sat in a tailored evening suit that had cost more than some people earned in a month. Beside him sat Chloe, his fiancée, wrapped in a silver dress, diamonds at her throat, her phone glowing in her hand as she checked the event schedule for the 5th time. They were supposed to be on their way to one of the most important charity galas of the year, the kind of event where the speeches were about kindness, but the real conversations happened around cameras, donors, board members, and political favors. Chloe had been talking about it all week. She had already decided where they would stand for photographs, which donors they needed to greet first, and how Liam should keep his answers short so the reporters could get a clean quote. To Chloe, this night was not just a fundraiser. It was a stage, and Liam, whether he liked it or not, was part of the performance. He was only 32, but in Seattle business circles his name already carried weight. Liam Bennett, the young billionaire chairman of Bennett Maritime Holdings, the company that controlled a large share of the city's port logistics, cargo routing, warehouse operations, and overseas shipping contracts. Magazines called him brilliant, investors called him disciplined, competitors called him impossible to read. But people who worked closest to him knew something quieter. Liam was not cold. He was careful. There was a difference. He had grown up around the port long before he had glass offices and boardrooms overlooking Elliott Bay. His father had once walked him through the old terminals in a yellow raincoat, teaching him the names of tugboats, dock workers, crane operators, mechanics, dispatchers, clerks, and warehouse loaders. His father had never let him believe that a company was made of numbers alone. A company, his father used to say, was made of people who got tired, people who got scared, people who needed somebody in charge to remember they were human. Liam had not forgotten those words. At least he told himself he had not. But success had a way of surrounding a man with polished rooms, controlled schedules, smiling advisors, and people who made sure he never had to see the parts of his own empire that were wet, cold, underpaid, or exhausted. His life had become expensive and efficient. His days were organized by assistants. His meals appeared on tables before he ordered them. His problems were handled before they reached him. And Chloe loved that world. She loved the invitations, the private elevators, the designer gowns delivered in tissue paper, the photographers who called her name as if she had earned it simply by standing beside Liam. She loved the way people turned their heads when they entered a room. She loved the idea of becoming Mrs. Bennett, not because Liam needed a title beside him, but because she believed the title would make her untouchable. That night, as rain hammered the roof of the car, Chloe did not notice the harbor slipping past the window. She only noticed the time. "We are already 12 minutes behind," she said, not looking at Liam, her thumb moving across her phone. "The governor's photo window is at 8:40. If we miss that, we may as well have stayed home." Liam glanced out at the dark line of warehouses. The driver had taken the port road because an accident had blocked part of the main route. It was not the scenic way to the hotel. It was narrower, emptier, and rougher, with puddles deep enough to swallow the tires and streetlights flickering over loading docks. "We'll still make it," Liam said calmly. Chloe exhaled through her nose, the delicate sound of someone forced to endure imperfection. "You always say that," she said, "but you do not understand how these things work. People remember who shows up late. They remember who looks careless. They remember who does not take the room seriously." Liam almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Chloe believed rooms were things to be conquered. She believed every event had winners and losers. Every photograph was a move. Every conversation was leverage. Every person was useful, dangerous, or invisible. At first, Liam had mistaken that for ambition. He had told himself she was driven, strategic, maybe even misunderstood. He had ignored the small things. The way she spoke over servers but became charming when cameras appeared. The way she called his assistant by the wrong name for months, even after being corrected. The way she smiled through charity speeches but complained afterward about the poor lighting, the cheap flowers, or how long the children from the foundation had taken to walk across the stage. There were signs. There are always signs. But when a man wants to believe he is chosen well, he learns to rename warning signs as quirks. He tells himself everyone has flaws. He tells himself love requires patience. He tells himself a cruel remark was just stress. A selfish decision was just pressure. And the chill he feels in someone's presence is only the weather. That night, the weather gave him no excuse. The town car slowed near an old section of the port, where a row of warehouses sat behind rusted gates. Beyond them, the harbor was almost invisible beneath the storm. Water ran along the curb in fast, dirty streams. A sign reading Bennett Maritime Holdings Operations Annex leaned slightly in the wind, near a security booth that looked forgotten. Liam was looking out the window when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the squeal of brakes or the cry of metal from a loading bay. The storm swallowed sounds and twisted them. But then it came again, thin and shaking, almost lost beneath the rain. A child crying. Liam straightened. Chloe did not look up. The car continued forward. There it was again, not loud, not dramatic. Just a small, broken sound coming from somewhere near the old awning of a closed receiving entrance. Liam leaned toward the driver. "Stop the car." Chloe's head snapped up. "What?" "Stop the car," Liam repeated. The driver eased the town car to the curb. Rain struck the windshield so hard the wipers could barely clear it. Chloe looked around, confused and annoyed. "Liam, what are you doing?" "I heard a child." "A child." She gave a short laugh, as if the idea itself was inconvenient. "Here." Liam did not answer. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Rain hit him instantly, sharp as needles. His polished shoes stepped into water deep enough to splash his cuffs. The wind pushed against him as he moved toward the awning, his evening coat darkening by the second. Behind him, Chloe called his name, but the storm tore the sound apart. Under the old metal awning, pressed against a damp concrete wall, sat a little boy. He could not have been more than 5. His hair was soaked flat against his forehead. His sneakers were muddy. His small jacket was too thin for that kind of rain, and he had curled himself into the narrowest dry patch he could find. Both arms were wrapped around a wooden toy boat with a broken mast, as if it were the only thing left in the world that still belonged to him. He was trying not to cry loudly. That was what struck Liam first. The boy was frightened enough to shake, but he had already learned to make his fear small. Liam lowered himself slowly so he would not tower over him. Rainwater ran from his hair down the back of his neck. His suit, the suit Chloe had chosen because it photographed well, was already ruined. The boy looked at him with wide eyes. Liam kept his voice gentle. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." The child swallowed, clutching the little boat tighter. "What's your name?" Liam asked. The boy hesitated. His lips trembled before he managed to say it. "Noah." Just one small name, almost carried away by the rain. Liam nodded, as if Noah had given him something important, because he had. "That's a good name," he said. "My name is Liam." Noah looked past him toward the road, then back toward the warehouse gates. Liam followed his gaze. "Are you looking for someone?" Noah nodded. It took time to piece together the story because Noah was cold, frightened, and too young to explain everything in order. Liam did not rush him. He asked simple questions. He listened between the words. He learned that Noah's mother worked somewhere nearby. that she had been called in for extra hours, that Noah had been staying with a neighbor but something had gone wrong, that he had slipped away believing he could find the big warehouse with the lights, the place where his mother wore gloves and carried a badge. He had walked farther than he understood. Then the rain had come harder, and the buildings had all started to look the same. Now he did not know where his mother was. He did not know how to go back. And the toy boat with its broken sail and scratched wooden hull was the only thing he had carried from home. Liam looked at that little boat for a moment. It was crudely made, but loved. The paint had worn away at the edges. Someone had repaired the bow once with glue that had dried unevenly. The mast had snapped near the base, leaving the sail limp against the deck. "Did someone make that for you?" Liam asked. Noah looked down. "My mom helped." The answer was so soft that Liam barely heard it, but it told him enough. This was not a toy bought to quiet a child in a store. It was something made in spare minutes, maybe at a kitchen table, after a long shift, maybe with a tired mother's hands guiding little fingers over sandpaper and paint. It was love, shaped like a boat. Liam glanced back toward the town car. Chloe was still inside, lit by the blue-white glow of her phone. She had cracked the window just enough to call out without stepping into the rain. "Liam, we need to go." He looked from her to Noah. The boy had begun shivering harder. There are moments in life that do not arrive with music or warning. They arrive quietly. A sound in the rain, a child under an awning, a choice so simple it exposes everything complicated around it. Liam removed his coat and wrapped it around Noah's shoulders. Chloe's voice sharpened from behind him. "Are you serious?" Liam ignored her. The coat swallowed Noah's expensive wool falling past his knees, but the boy pulled it close with both hands. Liam could feel the cold in him, not just the cold of rain, but the cold of being alone in a world too large for his small body. "We're going to find your mom," Liam said. Noah stared at him. Children have a way of measuring promises adults do not realize they are making. His eyes searched Liam's face, looking for the difference between kindness and performance. Liam did not look away. "I promise," he said. From the car, Chloe opened the door a few inches, careful not to let too much rain hit her dress. "Liam Bennett, if you do not get back in this car right now, we are going to miss the entire reception." Liam stood, keeping one hand lightly on Noah's shoulder. "There's an operations office near the annex. They can check who is working tonight." Chloe stared at him as if he had just suggested setting fire to the gala invitation. "You cannot be serious. Call security. Call the police. This is exactly what staff are for." The word staff landed strangely. Liam had heard Chloe use it before. It had never sounded quite so empty. "He's 5, Liam said, "and there are people whose job it is to handle that." She looked toward Noah for the first time, not with concern, but with irritation at what he represented. A delay, a stain, a complication. "We are not social workers." Noah shrank slightly under the coat. That tiny movement did more to Liam than Chloe's entire speech. He could have argued. He could have explained that the company whose sign stood above them was his. He could have reminded her that the gala was supposedly raising money for children in crisis, and that there was one right in front of them. But something in him became very still. He was not interested in winning a debate. He was interested in finding a mother. Liam leaned into the car and told the driver to wait nearby. Then he turned away from Chloe and started toward the operations annex, with Noah walking beside him, one small hand gripping the sleeve of Liam's coat. The walk was not far, but in the rain it felt longer. The storm blew sideways across the pavement. Trucks sat idle behind chain-link fences. Security lights flickered over puddles. Somewhere in the distance, a container stack groaned in the wind. Noah tried to keep up, but his shoes slipped twice. Each time Liam slowed without making him feel like a burden. He asked him about the boat. He asked whether it had a name. Noah, still trembling, told him it was called the Sarah, because that was his mother's name, and because she said every good boat should know who it was trying to get home to. Liam felt something tighten in his throat. He looked down at the broken toy tucked under the coat and thought of all the vessels his company moved across oceans. Ships worth hundreds of millions, tracked by satellites, insured, scheduled, monitored, guided into harbor by people working through the night. And here was this little boat, broken in a child's arms, carrying more love than all of them. By the time they reached the operations annex, Liam's hair was soaked, his shirt was damp through, and the lower half of his suit was speckled with mud from the old service road. His bow tie hung loose. Rainwater dripped from his sleeves onto the lobby floor as he pushed open the glass door. The lobby was bright, too bright after the dark outside. A vending machine hummed against one wall. A row of plastic chairs sat empty beneath outdated safety posters. Behind a desk near the entrance stood a security guard Liam did not recognize. The guard looked up. His name tag read, Marcus Reed. Marcus was young, maybe late 20s, broad-shouldered, newly pressed uniform, the posture of someone who had recently been given authority and was determined to use it before anyone questioned whether he deserved it. He looked first at Liam's wet clothes, then at Noah's oversized coat, then at the muddy water pooling beneath them. His face changed, not with concern, with suspicion. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested he had already decided he did not want to. Liam kept his voice even. "This boy is lost. His mother works here, or in one of the warehouses attached to this annex. We need to check the overtime roster." Marcus leaned back slightly. "The roster is not public information." "I understand," Liam said. "You can check it yourself. His mother's name is Sarah. I don't have a last name yet." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" Liam hesitated for half a second. It would have been easy. All he had to do was say his name in the right tone. Liam Bennett, chairman, owner, the man whose signature lived on half the documents in the building, the man whose company logo was mounted above the reception desk behind Marcus's shoulder. One sentence, and Marcus's face would change. But Liam did not say it, partly because Noah was standing beside him, still scared, and Liam did not want to turn the search for his mother into a display of power. Partly because something about Marcus's stare made Liam want to know what happened in this building when no one important was expected. So he said only, "Someone trying to help." Marcus gave a dry laugh. That laugh was small, but it carried years of other people's bad habits. The habit of deciding a person's worth by clothing. The habit of mistaking wetness for failure. The habit of believing rules existed to protect the building from people instead of protecting people inside the building. "Look," Marcus said, lowering his voice as if being reasonable, "this is a secure operations facility. You cannot just walk in here off the street." "We didn't walk in for shelter," Liam said. "We walked in because a child is lost. Then take him to a police station. He says his mother works here. A lot of people say a lot of things." Noah's fingers tightened around Liam's sleeve. Liam felt it. The small pressure of a child trying not to disappear. He looked down and saw Noah's eyes fixed on Marcus, trying to understand whether adults were allowed to speak this way when someone was afraid. Liam looked back at the guard. "Can you call a supervisor?" Marcus's expression hardened. "I am the security officer on duty." "Then call the warehouse lead." "And tell them what?" "That some guy wandered in from the rain with a kid and wants employee information." Liam studied him. "Tell them there is a lost child who believes his mother is working overtime. Tell them you need someone to check whether an employee named Sarah is on shift." Marcus crossed his arms. "You people always have a story." The words changed the temperature in the room. "You people." Liam did not move. He had heard words like that before, though usually not directed at him. He had heard executives say them about dock workers. Donors say them about families waiting outside clinics. Guests at private clubs say them about drivers, cleaners, kitchen staff. Anyone whose exhaustion was inconvenient to the comfort of people who had paid not to notice it. But standing there with rain dripping from his suit and a frightened child beside him, Liam felt the words differently, not as an insult to himself, as evidence. Marcus looked at the coat wrapped around Noah and seemed to mistake it for something stolen. "Where did you get that jacket?" Liam's voice cooled. It's mine. Marcus glanced at the ruined cuffs, the muddy shoes, the loose tie. Sure, it is. Noah looked up at Liam, confused. He could not understand the layers of contempt in the room, but he knew enough to feel when someone was being treated badly. Liam's phone buzzed. He did not reach for it. It buzzed again. Then again. Chloe. He let it ring. Marcus watched the phone vibrate in Liam's pocket and seemed to take Liam's silence as guilt. Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave. Number. The word was quiet. Marcus blinked. Liam did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He did not threaten. But something in the room shifted anyway, because calm, when it comes from a man who is not afraid, can be more unsettling than anger. No, Marcus repeated. No, Liam said. Not until this child is safe. Marcus reached for the radio at his shoulder. Then I'll have you removed. Call whoever you need to call. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Marcus saw a drenched stranger he believed he could dismiss. Liam saw a company culture he had allowed to grow in places where his speeches never reached. And Noah saw adults deciding whether his fear mattered. That was the part Liam would remember later. Not Marcus's tone, not the rain, not the ruined suit. Noah's face. The way the child watched the room, as if trying to learn what kind of world he had been born into. Liam's phone buzzed again, and this time he answered. Chloe's voice came through sharp enough that Marcus could hear pieces of it from several feet away. She did not ask whether the child had been found by his mother. She did not ask whether Liam was safe. She did not ask why his voice sounded strained, or whether he was still standing in the rain. She asked if he had lost his mind. Liam turned slightly away from Noah. Chloe spoke fast, furious, humiliated, before humiliation had even occurred. The photographer was asking where they were. The governor's team had moved on. Her friends were already seated near the front. People were noticing. People were asking questions. Did Liam understand what this looked like? Did he understand what he had cost them? Liam listened without interrupting. Then Chloe said the sentence that ended their future. She said he was ruining everything over a homeless child. Not a lost child. Not a frightened child. Not even a boy. A homeless child. As if that made him worth less urgency. As if the possibility that Noah had no safe place to go would have made him less deserving of help instead of more. The lobby seemed to go very quiet around Liam, though the rain was still hammering the glass doors. There are sentences that do not merely hurt. They reveal. They pull a curtain back so quickly that afterward you cannot pretend you did not see what was behind it. Liam closed his eyes for 1 second. In that second he saw Chloe at every gala, every dinner, every carefully staged charity photograph. He saw her smiling beside children whose names she never learned. He saw her praising kindness into microphones and complaining about inconvenience in private. He saw her touching his arm in front of donors, standing close when cameras appeared, and pulling away whenever compassion required more than a pose. He also saw himself. That was the harder part. He saw all the moments he had excused, all the small cruelties he had renamed, all the ways he had allowed beauty, status, and momentum to carry him toward a marriage his conscience had never fully accepted. When he opened his eyes, his voice was calm. He told Chloe he would not be attending the gala. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then outrage. He let it pass over him. He told her there was a child beside him who needed his mother, and that was where he was staying. Chloe said his name in that low, warning voice she used when she wanted to remind him how much embarrassment he was creating. Liam looked at Noah, who was trying to be brave inside a coat too large for him. Then Liam ended the call. He did not slam the phone down. He did not give a dramatic speech. He simply pressed the button and placed the phone back in his pocket. And with that small movement, the life he had been walking toward began to separate from him. Marcus had watched enough to sense there was money somewhere near this man, but not enough to understand how much. His uncertainty made him more defensive. Personal problems are not my concern, Marcus said. No, Liam answered. A lost child is. At that moment, the door to the back corridor opened, and an older janitor stepped into the lobby, pushing a yellow mop bucket. He was a thin man with silver hair tucked beneath a knit cap, and he froze when he saw Noah. "Noah," he said. The boy turned. Relief flickered across his face, fragile but real. "Mr. Eddie." The janitor left the mop bucket where it was and hurried over. "Where did you come from, little man? Your mom's been in Bay 3. She thinks you're with Mrs. Alvarez." Liam felt Noah's grip loosen slightly. Marcus's face shifted, but not enough. "You know him?" Liam asked. Eddie nodded. "Everybody knows Noah. Sarah brings him by sometimes when childcare falls through. She signs him in properly when she has to. Tonight, he wasn't supposed to be here." Marcus looked irritated now, not sorry. "That still doesn't mean we hand over employee information." Eddie stared at him. "It means you call his mother." Marcus opened his mouth, but before he could answer, a sound came from the corridor beyond the lobby. Fast footsteps. Then a woman appeared, breathless, soaked from the warehouse-side safety vest, hanging crooked over a dark hoodie. Her hair had partly escaped its tie. Her gloves were still on. Her face was pale with the terror of someone whose entire world has vanished for too many minutes. She saw Noah. Everything in her broke open. She crossed the lobby so quickly she nearly slipped, then dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. Noah disappeared against her, the oversized coat crumpling between them. The wooden boat pressed awkwardly against her shoulder, but she did not seem to notice. She held him as if the force of her embrace could undo every second he had been alone. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. Liam would learn the last name later. In that moment, she was only a mother trying to breathe again. Noah began crying harder now that he was safe enough to cry. Sarah rocked him, whispering into his wet hair, apologizing again and again. Though the failure had not been simple, and it had not been hers alone. She had been called in for overtime after another worker got sick. The neighbor watching Noah had suffered a medical scare and gone to an urgent care clinic, leaving Noah with an older cousin who fell asleep. Noah, waking in panic and wanting his mother, had done what small children do. He had tried to solve a big fear with a little plan. He had put on his shoes, taken his toy boat, and gone looking. Sarah looked up at Liam with tears still on her face. "You found him." Liam nodded. She tried to stand still, holding Noah, still shaking. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say. I was just told he might be missing, and I thought—" Her voice failed. "I thought I lost him." Liam shook his head gently. "You didn't lose him. He was looking for you." That made her cry again, but differently. Noah pulled back just enough to show her the broken boat. In his small, guilty voice, he told her the mast had snapped when he fell near the curb. Sarah took the boat in both hands, as if it were not a toy, but a witness. "That can be fixed," she told him. "We can fix that." Liam heard the words and felt them settle somewhere deep. That can be fixed. Not everything could. Not every insult could be unsaid. Not every neglected system could be corrected with one decision. Not every relationship deserved to continue because an apology arrived late. But some things could be fixed. A broken mast, a company culture, a child's sense of safety, a man's direction. Sarah turned toward Marcus then, and for the first time her relief had to make room for fear. She seemed suddenly aware of where she was, who was watching, and what this could cost her. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I know he shouldn't be here. I know the rules. Please don't write this up as misconduct. I can explain." Liam noticed that. Her first instinct after finding her son was to protect her job. That told him more about the company than any report ever had. Marcus straightened behind the desk, ready to reclaim authority. "This is a serious breach." Sarah's face drained. Noah clung to her. Liam looked at Marcus. "Enough." Marcus stiffened. "Excuse me." Liam walked slowly toward the reception desk. Behind it, mounted on the wall, was the company logo, Bennett Maritime Holdings. His family name in brushed metal letters shining under cheap fluorescent lights. He looked at that name for a long moment. Then he turned back. "My name is Liam Bennett," he said. The silence that followed was immediate. Not because the name was loud, because recognition moved through the room like a current. Marcus blinked once, twice. His eyes darted from Liam's soaked suit to the logo behind him, to Eddie, to Sarah, to the security monitor, and back again. His face changed so quickly it was almost painful to watch. Suspicion became confusion. Confusion became fear. Fear tried to become politeness, but there was nowhere for it to stand. Sarah went still. Eddie lowered his eyes, though a faint sadness crossed his face, as if he had already known this was possible, and wished the company had behaved better before it mattered. Marcus swallowed. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't realize." Liam raised a hand, not sharply but firmly enough to stop him. "That is the problem," he said. Marcus's mouth closed. Liam did not speak like a man enjoying power. He spoke like a man ashamed of what power had revealed. "You didn't realize who I was," he said. "So you decided I did not deserve basic respect. You didn't realize who this child was connected to, so you decided his fear was a nuisance. You didn't realize anyone important was watching, so you let your first instinct speak for you." Marcus looked down. Liam's voice remained steady. "I am not angry because you failed to recognize me. I am angry because you thought recognition should matter." That sentence settled over the lobby. Sarah held Noah closer. The rain outside continued, but inside the annex, no one moved. Liam turned to Sarah. "Are you Sarah Whitmore?" She nodded slowly. "What department?" "Warehouse operations, night inventory, and cargo release support." "How long have you worked here?" 6 years. 6 years. Liam tried to place her face and felt another kind of shame when he could not. His company employed thousands of people, but that was not an excuse. Somewhere in the building, reports carried productivity numbers that had Sarah's work inside them. Somewhere, contracts had been fulfilled because she had stayed late. Somewhere, supervisors had depended on her to keep freight moving, while people in higher offices talked about efficiency as if it were born in spreadsheets. "Who is your supervisor tonight?" Liam asked. Sarah's fear returned. "Mr. Bennett, please, I really can explain. I never bring Noah unless I have approval. I know this looks bad, but I didn't." "I'm not asking so I can punish you," Liam said softly. "I'm asking because I need to understand why a mother working overtime was so afraid of losing her job that she apologized before she finished breathing." Sarah stared at him. No one had put it that way before. When people talk about working families, they often do it from a distance. They use clean words, staffing issues, childcare challenges, labor shortages, retention concerns. But those words do not show a woman racing through a warehouse in wet boots, terrified her missing child will become a disciplinary file. They do not show a 5-year-old under an awning clutching a broken boat because he thinks finding his mother is his responsibility. They do not show how poverty turns every accident into a threat. Liam saw it now. He saw it standing right in front of him. Marcus tried again, weaker this time. "Sir, I apologize. I was following protocol." Liam looked at him. "Protocol did not make you say 'you people.'" Marcus flinched. Liam did not raise his voice. That made it worse. "Protocol did not make you assume a child in distress was a problem to remove. Protocol did not make you treat a wet stranger as less than human. That was not policy. That was character." For a second, Marcus looked as though he expected to be fired on the spot. Part of Liam wanted to do it. The easier part. There is a clean satisfaction in immediate punishment. It gives everyone a moment to applaud. It makes the powerful person look decisive. It draws a line between the bad employee and the good company, as if the company had nothing to do with what it trained, tolerated, ignored, or rewarded. But Liam knew better. Marcus had made his own choices, and he would be accountable for them. But he had not invented that culture alone. He had absorbed it. From supervisors who valued locked doors over listening. From managers who talked about workers as numbers. From executives who toured facilities only after floors had been cleaned, uniforms checked, and complaints moved out of sight. If Liam fired Marcus and left everything else untouched, he would be treating the symptom like the disease. So he said, "You are relieved from front desk duty tonight. Eddie, please stay with Sarah and Noah until I arrange transport. Marcus, you will wait in the conference room until Miss Patel arrives." Marcus's face went pale. Miss Patel from corporate. Yes, the head of human resources was not someone employees wanted to meet unexpectedly at night. But Liam was not finished. "You will participate in a formal review," he said. "And if you remain employed here, you will complete training in de-escalation bias and employee support. After that, you will spend 2 paid shifts shadowing warehouse staff, janitorial staff, and family assistance intake. Not as punishment theater, as education." Marcus looked confused by the word paid. Liam noticed. "If we want people to learn, we do not make them poorer for the lesson." Sarah looked at Liam then with something like disbelief. He turned back to her. "Do you have a safe way home tonight?" She nodded automatically, then stopped. "My car is here, but Noah's wet and I still have 2 hours left on my shift." "You are done for tonight," Liam said. Panic flashed in her eyes again. "With pay," he added. She blinked. "And tomorrow will not count against your attendance." Sarah's hand rose to Noah's hair, smoothing it down, though it was still damp and tangled. "Thank you," she whispered. It was not the gratitude of someone receiving luxury. It was the gratitude of someone being allowed to stop surviving for one night. Liam asked Eddie to bring towels from the staff room. He asked the driver to pull the car closer. He called his executive assistant, who answered on the second ring, startled by the noise of rain in the background. Liam told her he needed the on-call HR director, the regional operations director, and the warehouse supervisor on a conference line within 10 minutes. He also asked for someone to contact the gala organizers and inform them he would not attend. His assistant, trained by years of handling impossible requests, simply said she would take care of it. Then Liam did one more thing. He removed the engagement ring box from his inner pocket. He had been carrying it because Chloe wanted additional photographs, that night photographs, where she could angle her hand toward the camera while donors congratulated them. The ring itself was already hers, but the box had been brought for presentation, for image, for the kind of public romance Chloe understood better than private kindness. Liam looked at it in his palm, a small velvet box, a symbol of a life that suddenly felt like a room with no air. He did not open it. He placed it on the reception desk. Marcus watched him, bewildered. Sarah looked away, sensing this was not for her. Liam took out his phone and sent Chloe one message. Not angry, not cruel, not long. He told her the engagement was over. He told her the ring box would be waiting at the operations annex reception desk, and that his driver would take her wherever she wished to go. Then he turned off his phone. At the gala, Chloe would later tell people that Liam had humiliated her. She would say he had suffered some dramatic moral episode. She would say he had always been unpredictable, too sentimental, too attached to ordinary people, as if compassion were a flaw that could be diagnosed by those who lacked it. But none of that mattered in the lobby. In the lobby, a mother was drying her son's hair with a rough warehouse towel. A janitor was kneeling to help Noah fit the broken mast back into the little boat's hole, even though it would not stay. A security guard was staring at the floor, beginning to understand that the person he had dismissed was the one person in the building whose opinion could change his life. And Liam was looking at his company name on the wall. For the first time in years, it did not look like a legacy. It looked like a question. What are you doing with what you have been given? The rest of that night unfolded without cameras. That mattered. There was no photographer to capture Liam wrapping another towel around Noah's shoulders. No headline when he asked Sarah whether she had eaten and discovered she had skipped dinner because the overtime shift started before she could stop at home. No applause when Eddie quietly brought vending machine crackers and a paper cup of hot water because that was all the annex had after hours. The most important moments in a person's life often happen where no one can praise them. Liam stayed until Sarah and Noah were ready to leave. He did not make a show of driving them himself, because he could see Sarah had already lost too much control over her night. Instead, he offered choices: her car, his driver, a company car, or a ride arranged through a trusted supervisor. Sarah chose to drive herself once Noah was warm enough. Liam respected that. Before she left, Noah looked up at him, still half hidden inside the oversized coat. The boy held out the coat with both hands, as if returning a royal cloak. Liam crouched to his level. "You can keep it until it's dry," he said. Noah shook his head. He was very serious about this. The coat belonged to Liam, and children who grow up watching their parents count money learn early not to keep what is not theirs. So Liam accepted it, wet and heavy, and folded it over his arm. Noah hesitated, then held out the broken boat. Liam looked at Sarah. She smiled faintly through exhaustion. "He wants you to see it." Liam took the toy carefully. Up close, he saw small fingerprints in the paint, a crooked blue stripe along the hull, a name written underneath in a child's uneven hand: the Sarah. Liam felt the weight of it. "This is a strong boat," he said. Noah shook his head and pointed to the broken mast. Liam nodded. "A boat can be strong and still need repair." Noah seemed to consider that. Then, in a voice still rough from crying, he asked if Liam knew how to fix sails. Liam thought of his father, of evenings in an old garage near the water, learning how to tie knots, sandwood, and listen before giving answers. "I used to," he said. "I may need to practice." Noah accepted this as honest. That was the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. After Sarah and Noah left, the annex felt emptier. The rain had softened, but water still moved down the glass in long silver lines. Liam stood alone near the reception desk, the ring box still sitting there like an object from someone else's life. He did not feel triumphant. He felt awake. That was different. Triumph lifts a person above the moment. Awakening brings him deeper into it. Liam was not thinking about how righteous he had been. He was thinking about what he had missed. He was thinking about how many Sarahs worked nights in buildings with his name on them. How many employees had learned to apologize before asking for help. How many guards had been trained to protect property more carefully than people. How many supervisors had quietly punished human emergencies because the spreadsheet did not have a column for mercy. By midnight, the conference room lights were on. Ms. Patel arrived with wet hair and a laptop bag, followed by the regional operations director, then the warehouse supervisor, who looked as though he had been pulled out of sleep and into judgment. They expected a crisis about security, maybe theft, maybe a public relations problem. Instead, Liam asked for the overtime roster, then the attendance policy, then childcare incident reports, then disciplinary records connected to emergency family absences. The room grew more uncomfortable with each document. The policies on paper looked neutral. They always do. Points for late arrivals, warnings for unscheduled departures, notes for repeated schedule conflicts. Manager discretion allowed but rarely defined. Emergency support available but buried beneath a process employees on night shift barely knew existed. Liam read quietly. No one liked watching him read quietly. He found Sarah's name repeatedly, but not in the way the supervisor seemed to fear. She had one of the highest accuracy rates in night inventory. She had trained new hires without a formal training title. She had caught shipment errors that prevented costly delays. She had stayed late 23 times in the past 6 months. She had volunteered for difficult shifts when others could not come in. In performance comments, supervisors described her as dependable, precise, calm under pressure, and trusted by peers. Then, in attendance notes, he found 3 warnings connected to child care emergencies. Not misconduct, emergencies. A sick child, a canceled sitter, a school closure. Each note was written in the flat language of bureaucracy, but Liam could see the life behind it. A mother balancing wages against worry, a child's fever measured against an attendance point. A supervisor, perhaps sympathetic in private, but bound by a system that made compassion feel risky. Liam looked up. Why has she not been considered for promotion? The warehouse supervisor shifted. Sarah is excellent, but management roles require flexibility. Liam leaned back slowly. She works nights, overtime, and emergency coverage. What definition of flexibility are we using? The supervisor had no answer ready. The regional director tried to soften it. What I think he means is leadership roles can be demanding, and with her family situation, Liam's eyes moved to him. The man stopped. With her family situation, Liam said, she has continued to outperform people with fewer obstacles and more support. No one argued. Because the records were there. Boring records. Ignored records. The kind that never make speeches but tell the truth if someone powerful bothers to read them. By 2 a.m, Liam had made 3 decisions. The first was personal. His engagement to Chloe was over. Not paused, not under review, not waiting for an apology drafted by someone else. Over. A person can make one cruel comment under stress and still be redeemable. Liam knew that. He was not ending a future over a single careless sentence. He was ending it because the sentence had finally named what many smaller moments had already shown him. Chloe had not failed one test. She had revealed the grading system by which she judged human worth. And Liam could not build a home with someone who saw a lost child as an obstacle to a photograph. The second decision was institutional. The annex incident would not be buried. There would be a company-wide review of front desk protocols, emergency family support, night shift access, and employee treatment at all reception and security points. Not a vague memo about values, actual changes, training, reporting channels, supervisor accountability, emergency child care partnerships. Clear instructions that any lost child connected to a facility would be treated first as a safety priority, not a security inconvenience. Every manager would attend listening sessions with night shift workers, dock staff, warehouse teams, janitorial staff, and security officers. Not catered lunches where executives spoke for 40 minutes and employees nodded. Real sessions, small groups, protected time, paid attendance. Anonymous follow-up. Liam knew some executives would complain. They always did when values became operational. Values are easy when they fit on a website. They become expensive when they require schedule changes, budget lines, retraining, apologies, and the humility to admit that the company had confused efficiency with indifference. Liam was ready to pay that cost. The third decision was about Sarah, but not as charity. That distinction mattered to him. By morning, he had asked for a full review of her work history, supervisor comments, peer feedback, and operational knowledge. What came back over the next several days was not the profile of someone needing rescue. It was the profile of someone the company had been foolish enough to overlook. Sarah knew the warehouse flow better than some managers. She understood which loading sequences caused bottlenecks, which temporary workers needed extra support, which software flags were often ignored because they appeared too late, and which safety complaints had been circulating quietly without reaching leadership. She had informal authority already. People asked her questions because she gave accurate answers. New hires followed her because she did not embarrass them when they made mistakes. She had been leading without the title. The company had simply been taking the leadership for free. When Liam realized that he felt something sharper than pity. Respect. Respect changes the way help is given. Pity looks down and offers a hand for a moment. Respect looks across and asks why the person was kept below in the first place. Within 2 weeks, Sarah was invited to interview for an operations management role that had recently opened. Liam did not hand it to her in secret. He did not make her a symbol without consent. He made sure the process was fair, documented, and based on her work. He removed the invisible barrier that had been placed around her family responsibilities and asked whether the company could design leadership schedules around actual human beings, instead of pretending good employees had no children, no illnesses, no aging parents, no emergencies, and no lives beyond the clock. Sarah prepared for the interview like someone who had been waiting years for a door to open but refused to walk through it unready. She brought notes, not emotional notes, operational ones. She explained how inventory handoffs could be simplified between night and morning crews. She identified 2 recurring errors in cargo release documentation. She described a safer layout for temporary storage during storm delays. She proposed a rotating childcare emergency coverage system that would reduce last-minute absences instead of punishing them after they happened. When she finished, the panel was quiet. Not because they were being kind, because she was right. Sarah was promoted the following month. Her raise was significant. Her schedule changed to include flexible hours, remote administrative time when possible, and a reliable backup plan for nights when Noah needed care. She was given authority, not just praise, training, not just congratulations, a title that matched work she had already been doing. The day she received the offer, she did not cry in front of everyone. She held herself, carefully thanked the panel, asked 2 practical questions about staffing and transition timelines, and signed the paperwork with a steady hand. Only later in the parking lot, sitting in her old car with Noah's booster seat in the back, did she let herself lower her forehead to the steering wheel and breathe like someone who had been carrying a weight for so long she had forgotten what standing upright felt like. Noah from the back seat asked if this meant she would not be tired all the time. Sarah laughed then, though it came out half broken. She told him she would probably still be tired sometimes, but maybe not scared all the time. That was enough. Meanwhile, Chloe did what people like Chloe often do when they lose control of the story. She tried to rewrite it. At first, she sent furious messages, then wounded ones, then elegant ones, carefully phrased as if lawyers, friends, or future biographers might one day read them. She said Liam had embarrassed her publicly. She said he had made a life-altering decision in an emotional state. She said he was punishing her for one unfortunate phrase. She said he owed her a conversation. Liam did not respond immediately, not because he wanted to be cruel, because he had learned that immediate replies can become invitations to perform old roles. When they finally met, it was not at his penthouse or her favorite restaurant. It was in a quiet conference room at his attorney's office, neutral and plain. Chloe arrived in cream-colored wool, composed, beautiful, and colder than the rain had been. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. She asked if he was truly willing to throw away their future over a child he did not know. Liam listened to the shape of the question. Their future. A child he did not know. Even then, she could not hear herself. He told her gently that he was not throwing away their future. He was finally admitting they had wanted different ones. Chloe's face tightened. She said he was being dramatic. She said wealthy men were always expected to save everyone, and that he would learn eventually that people took advantage of softness. She said the world did not reward sentiment. Liam thought of Sarah's work records. Eddie's mop bucket abandoned mid-lobby. Noah's hand gripping his sleeve. Marcus's face when he realized respect had been conditional. The broken toy boat waiting on Liam's desk because Noah had later trusted him enough to let him try repairing it. Then Liam said the only thing he needed to say. He told Chloe that if kindness looked like weakness to her, then she had never understood strength. After that, there was not much left. The legal separation of their engagement was simple compared with the emotional separation that had already happened in the rain. Invitations were canceled, planned announcements withdrawn, publicists notified. The ring returned through attorneys. For several weeks, society pages speculated. People whispered. Some said Chloe had been blindsided. Some said Liam had changed. Some said there must have been another woman, because people who do not understand conscience always look for scandal to explain it. There was no other woman. There was a child in the rain. There was a mother who deserved better. There was a company that needed to look at itself. There was a man who finally stopped confusing momentum with commitment. At Bennett Maritime, the changes began awkwardly. as real changes often do. The first listening session was held in a warehouse break room that smelled faintly of coffee, wet cardboard, and machine oil. Liam attended without a speech. That alone made people suspicious. Executives usually came to talk, not listen. They came with slides, announcements, and phrases like, "moving forward." They did not sit on folding chairs while night shift workers described what it felt like to be treated as replaceable by people who could not do their jobs for 1 hour. The first few employees said little. Then Eddie spoke. He talked about doors, not physical doors, though there were plenty of those. He talked about the invisible doors inside the company, the doors that opened quickly if a person wore a suit and slowly if a person wore a uniform. The doors that opened for complaints from clients, but not from cleaners. The doors that seemed locked to single parents until their mistakes became visible enough to punish. No one applauded. It was not that kind of meeting, but people listened. Then a forklift operator spoke about unsafe pressure during late shipments. A dispatcher talked about being cursed at by managers when storms delayed cargo. No human could safely move faster. A janitorial worker described being ignored by office staff until something spilled. A security guard admitted that training had focused heavily on threats and barely at all on distressed workers, frightened families, language barriers, or children. Liam took notes by hand. That mattered more than he expected. People watched the pen move. They watched him write down names of broken processes, not names of people to blame. Slowly more voices entered the room. Not everything changed quickly. It would be dishonest to say it did. A company is not transformed by one rainy night and a new training module. Culture is made of repeated choices. It resists correction. It hides in jokes, schedules, assumptions, budgets, and the phrases people use when no one powerful is nearby. There were managers who resented the review. There were executives who worried about costs. There were supervisors who complained that compassion would create loopholes. There were employees who did not trust any of it at first because they had seen too many initiatives arrive with posters and disappear with the next quarterly report. Liam did not demand trust. He tried to earn it. He showed up again and again. At the port before sunrise, when trucks lined up at the gates and coffee steamed from paper cups. At night during storm delays when warehouse lights burned against the dark. In small meetings where employees expected him to send someone else and looked surprised when he walked in himself. He learned names. Not all of them at once, not perfectly, but he tried, and when he forgot, he corrected himself, without making the other person comfort him for forgetting. He asked questions that were not designed to make him look insightful. What slows you down? What do customers never see? What rule makes sense on paper but fails at 2 in the morning? Where do people get hurt and then stay quiet? Who do others go to when something has to be fixed quickly? That last question kept leading back to Sarah. As operations manager, Sarah did not become loud. She did not suddenly act like someone else. She remained practical, observant, and plain-spoken. The difference was that now, when she identified a problem, people had to answer her. When she recommended a schedule change, it moved beyond hallway agreement into policy. When she saw a worker struggling, she understood the difference between excuse and emergency because she had lived too long under managers who pretended there was no difference. Her team respected her first because she knew the work, then because she knew the people doing it. She could look at a delayed container report and see not only numbers, but the tired crew behind them. She could correct a mistake without humiliating the person who made it. She could tell a worker to go home to a sick child and still make sure the shift was covered. She did not confuse kindness with looseness. She knew standards mattered. She also knew that standards held better when people were treated as human beings capable of loyalty, not machines waiting to fail. Marcus's path was harder. At first he was angry. Not openly. He was too careful for that now. But anger has a smell. It lives in stiff shoulders, short answers, the way a person accepts correction while secretly rehearsing why they were the real victim. Marcus felt humiliated. He told himself he had been unlucky. Anyone could have made the same mistake. He had just happened to make it with the chairman. The training did not transform him in a day. Real remorse rarely arrives fully dressed. During the first de-escalation session, Marcus gave the expected answers. During the bias workshop, he listened with a blank face. During the shadowing shifts, he seemed uncomfortable wearing a visitor badge and following employees whose jobs he had barely considered before. Then, on his second shadowing night, he watched an older warehouse worker named Teresa handle a mislabeled cargo pallet that could have delayed an entire shipment. She noticed the error because of a faint discrepancy in the routing code, something Marcus would never have seen. She corrected it, called dispatch, documented the change, and prevented hours of confusion. No one applauded. No one even seemed surprised. Marcus asked how often things like that happened. Teresa shrugged and said, all the time. Then she added that most people only noticed warehouse workers when something went wrong. That sentence stayed with him. Later, during a family support training, Marcus listened to a facilitator describe what fear does to people at reception desks. How a person in crisis may look suspicious because panic makes them disorganized. How a parent searching for a child may sound demanding because terror has stolen their politeness. How a wet stranger may be a threat or may be someone who has just stepped into danger to help. Marcus looked down at his hands. He thought of Noah. Not Liam, Noah. The boy's eyes in the lobby. The way he had held that broken boat. The way he had learned for a few minutes that a person behind a desk could make his fear feel like wrongdoing. Marcus did not become noble overnight, but he began to change. The first real sign came 6 weeks later when a delivery driver arrived at the wrong gate with limited English, soaked from another storm, and visibly distressed because his phone had died. The old Marcus might have barked instructions through the glass. The new Marcus stepped out from behind the desk, found an interpreter line called the receiving office, and stayed with the driver until the confusion was resolved. No one important was watching. At least, that was what Marcus thought. But Eddie saw. Eddie did not praise him loudly. He simply nodded once while passing with his mop bucket. For Marcus, that nod mattered more than he expected. A few days after that, Marcus asked Sarah if Noah was doing okay. The question was awkward. Sarah studied him for a moment, weighing whether it was genuine. Then she said Noah was better. Marcus nodded and looked down. He told her he was sorry for how he had spoken that night. Not sorry if she was offended, not sorry because he got in trouble. Sorry because he had made a frightened child feel unwanted in a building where his mother worked. Sarah did not forgive him dramatically. She thanked him for saying it. Then she told him that the apology would mean more if he remembered it the next time someone came in scared, wet, angry, confused, or poor. Marcus accepted that. It was enough for the day. As for Liam, his life became quieter in some ways and less comfortable in others. The penthouse felt different after Chloe left. Not lonely exactly, because loneliness had been there before. More honest. Her absence removed the constant machinery of events, fittings, invitations, image management, and social strategy. There were fewer flowers in the foyer, fewer unopened gift boxes on side tables, fewer conversations about who had noticed them. But there was also more silence. At first, Liam did not know what to do with it. He had spent years filling silence with work. Before Chloe, it had been acquisitions, port expansions, negotiations, legal reviews, investor calls. With Chloe, it had become galas, dinners, weekends with people who spoke in polished fragments and never asked questions they did not already know how to use. Now some evenings he came home and heard only the hum of the city below. He would stand by the window and look toward the harbor lights. He thought often about the night and the rain, not because he regretted it, because it had opened too many doors inside him to close them again. One Saturday morning, about a month after Sarah's promotion, Liam visited the old workshop space at the port where retired maintenance equipment was stored. It had once belonged to his father, or at least that was how Liam remembered it. In truth, it had belonged to the company, but his father had spent so much time there teaching apprentices and repairing small things that everyone had called it Bennett's Corner. On a shelf near the back, under a layer of dust, Liam found an old wooden toolbox. Inside were sandpaper clamps, small carving knives, marine glue, twine, and a few pieces of thin cedar. The tools smelled faintly of oil and time. Liam brought Noah's toy boat there with Sarah's permission. The repair took longer than it should have. He could have paid someone to make it perfect. He could have ordered a beautiful model boat from a craftsman, polished and painted with Noah's name engraved in gold. But that would have missed the point. The Sarah did not need to become expensive. It needed to remain itself. So Liam worked slowly. He sanded the broken mast base, cut a new piece to match the old, repaired the sail with a small patch that did not hide the tear completely, strengthened the hull where the glue had weakened. Underneath, beside Noah's uneven lettering, he added a tiny date in pencil, small enough not to take over the toy's history. The date of the rainy night. When Noah saw it again, he touched the repaired mast as if it might vanish. Liam waited. Noah inspected the sail, the blue stripe, the hull, the pencil mark beneath. He looked very serious, as children do when adults have entered the sacred territory of their belongings. Finally, he said it looked like the same boat, only braver. Sarah turned away quickly, pretending to check her bag. Liam smiled. He did not tell Noah that boats were not brave. He had learned better by then. Sometimes children give names to things adults have forgotten how to see. After that, Noah began visiting the port under proper arrangements when Sarah's schedule required it, not wandering through dangerous areas, not hidden in break rooms. There was now a family waiting space near the annex, modest but clean, with proper sign-in procedures, emergency contacts, snacks, blankets, books, and a small shelf where workers could leave toys for children who had to wait during unexpected gaps in care. It was not a miracle. It was a room. But for some families, a safe room at the right hour can feel like mercy with walls. Noah liked the window facing the harbor. He would sit with his repaired boat on his lap and watch the real ships move past in the distance. Sometimes Liam joined him for a few minutes between meetings. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not. Noah asked questions that adults had stopped asking because they were too busy pretending to understand everything. Why do ships have names? How do they know where to go when the water is dark? Can a boat get tired? Does rain make the ocean bigger? Liam answered what he could. When he did not know, he said so. Noah seemed to respect that more than confident nonsense. One afternoon, Noah asked why Liam was not marrying the shiny lady anymore. Sarah, sitting nearby with a folder open on her lap, froze. Liam looked at her silently, asking whether he should answer. She gave the smallest nod. So Liam told Noah in the simplest way he could that sometimes grown-ups realize they do not love people in the way a home needs love. Sometimes they realized just in time that the life they were building would not be kind. Noah thought about that. Then he asked if the shiny lady was mad because of him. Liam felt the question like a hand around his heart. He moved closer, lowering his voice. He told Noah no. He told him the broken part had already been there. The rain only helped Liam see it. Noah accepted this after a while, though not easily. Children often blame themselves for storms they did not create. That is why adults must be careful with truth. Not every detail belongs to a child. But every child deserves freedom from guilt that is not theirs. Months passed. Seattle moved from hard winter rain into the pale brightness of spring. The port changed in ways that would not have impressed people who only liked dramatic before and after stories. There was no single ribbon cutting that captured it, no glossy ad campaign. But the people inside the company felt it. A security desk that once turned fear away now had clear procedures for family emergencies. Night shift supervisors had discretion they were expected to use and document with humanity. Employees knew where to ask for support before crisis became discipline. Promotion panels were required to review informal leadership contributions, not just polished resumes. Listening sessions became regular, and not all of them were comfortable. Liam learned that reform is not a speech. It is repetition. It is budget approval when no one applauds. It is reading complaint summaries on a Sunday morning. It is keeping a difficult manager in a coaching process long enough to see whether accountability can become growth. It is firing someone when they prove it cannot. It is promoting the person who has been doing the work without the title. It is admitting again and again that good intentions mean very little until they change someone's day. Sarah became one of the strongest managers in the operation. Not the loudest, not the most polished, the strongest. Her team's error rate dropped. Retention improved. Safety reports increased at first, which alarmed one executive, until Sarah explained that more reports did not mean more danger. It meant people finally believed speaking up might matter. Over time, the actual incidents dropped too. People began requesting transfers to her shift. That told Liam more than any dashboard. Marcus remained employed, but not untouched by consequence. His review stayed in his file. His front desk role was conditional for months. He had to earn back trust through behavior, not apology. And slowly he did. Not perfectly, not always gracefully, but enough that one evening when a young mother came in frantic because her husband had not answered after a machinery delay, Marcus did not hide behind policy. He followed the new protocol, found the floor lead got accurate information, and stayed calm until the woman did too. Later he told Eddie he had almost said the wrong thing at first. Eddie asked what stopped him. Marcus said he remembered the boy. Eddie nodded. Some lessons should be allowed to haunt us a little, not to destroy us, to keep us awake. Chloe from a distance remained Chloe. She appeared at other events, smiled in other photographs, eventually attached herself to another circle of wealthy people who admired surfaces and avoided storms. There were moments when Liam saw her in society coverage, her chin tilted just so, her diamonds catching light, her smile as perfect as ever. He felt no hatred. That surprised him. There had been anger at first, disappointment, embarrassment at his own blindness. But hatred would have tied him to her longer than love had. Over time, what remained was clarity. Chloe had wanted a life where kindness could be displayed but not demanded. Liam wanted no part of that anymore. One morning in early spring, the sky over Seattle opened blue after days of rain, the kind of blue that makes the whole city seem forgiven for its grayness. Sunlight touched the harbor cranes and turned the water silver. Workers moved through the port with lighter shoulders. Even the old annex looked less tired. Liam arrived without a scheduled tour. He had learned to do that occasionally. Not to catch people doing wrong, to catch the truth before it dressed itself for visitors. Near the family waiting space, he heard laughter. Noah came running along the safe walkway beside the fence, not too fast because Sarah had rules, but fast enough to make his joy visible. In his hands he held the Sarah-repaired mast, upright little sail fluttering in the breeze. Behind him, Sarah walked with a tablet under one arm, speaking with a shift lead, while still keeping one eye on her son, in that way parents do without thinking. Liam stopped. Noah reached the painted line where he knew he had to turn back. He lifted the boat into the wind, as if testing whether it remembered the rain. For a moment, everything that had happened seemed to gather in that small image. A child who had once crouched under a broken awning now ran in sunlight. A toy that had once hung limp in his arms now held its sail. A mother who had once apologized for needing help now gave instructions as a respected manager. A guard who had once judged by appearance now opened doors with more care. A man who had once been on his way to pose for charity had finally learned to practice it where no cameras waited. Liam felt his father's old words return. A company is made of people, not buildings, not contracts, not ships, people. People who arrive tired, people who make mistakes, people who are raising children between shifts, people who mop floors after executives leave, people who stand behind desks and need to learn the difference between authority and dignity, people who get lost in storms, people who are found because someone stops. Sarah noticed Liam and gave a small wave. Noah turned, saw him, and ran over with the boat. He asked if Liam wanted to see how fast it could go. Liam said yes, because at that moment, there was no meeting in the world more important. They walked together to a shallow rain puddle left near the edge of the paved yard, safely away from the traffic lanes. Noah placed the boat on the water, and for a few seconds it floated there, tiny and proud, its repaired sail catching the morning breeze. Noah crouched beside it, face bright with concentration. Liam crouched too, not caring that his expensive trousers creased at the knee. Sarah watched from a few steps away. The boat drifted forward slowly, not far, just enough. Noah looked up smiling, with the full trust of a child who had seen adults fail and then seen some of them try to do better. Liam smiled back. He understood then that the rainy night had not interrupted his life. It had interrupted his sleep. There is a difference. An interruption takes something from you. An awakening gives something back. That night had taken away a gala, an engagement, an illusion, and a version of success that looked good from a distance, but could not withstand the sound of a crying child. But it had given him something far more valuable. It had given him a clear view of Chloe's heart before he built a home beside it. It had shown him the hidden fractures in his company before those fractures swallowed more people. It had reminded him that leadership is not proven in speeches to people who already admire you. It is proven in the lobby at midnight when someone with less power is cold, scared, and inconvenient. Most of all, it had shown him that a person's real value is rarely revealed when everything is arranged for applause. It is revealed in the unscheduled moment, when the road is wet, when the event is waiting, when the people around you are impatient, when no one would blame you for driving past, when stopping will cost you something. Liam had once believed legacy was something inherited, a name on a building, a company built by a father, a fortune carried forward by a son. Now he understood legacy differently. Legacy was the child who would grow up remembering that one adult stopped in the rain. It was the mother who would lead differently because someone finally saw her clearly. It was the guard who would think twice before turning fear away from a desk. It was the workers who would enter the building with a little more trust that their lives mattered inside it. It was the broken boat, repaired but not replaced, still carrying the marks of what it had survived. That is the quiet truth at the heart of this story. Kindness does not always arrive as a grand rescue. Sometimes it is a man stepping out of a warm car into cold rain. Sometimes it is listening to a child long enough to understand his fear. Sometimes it is refusing to let policy become an excuse for cruelty. Sometimes it is ending a life that looks perfect because the heart inside it has gone empty. Sometimes it is looking at a worker everyone has overlooked and realizing she was never weak. She was carrying more than anyone bothered to see. And sometimes kindness changes more than one life because it exposes the exact place where truth was waiting. Liam did not become a good man because he was rich. He became a better man because for one night, he stopped letting wealth protect him from reality. He chose the child over the photograph. He chose compassion over appearance. He chose to repair what he could, even when the first broken thing he had to face was inside his own life. And years later, if anyone asked him when everything changed, Liam would not mention a board vote, a financial milestone, or a magazine cover. He would remember rain on the roof of a black car, a small cry beneath an old awning, a wooden boat with a broken mast, and a little boy named Noah waiting in the cold for someone to decide he mattered. If this story reminded you that one act of kindness can reveal the truth about everything around it, share your thoughts below. Do you think Liam was right to end his engagement after Chloe showed him who she really was? And if you believe stories like this still matter, stay with us for more emotional stories about dignity, compassion, and the quiet choices that change lives. Julian Vance did not lose his future on the day the Hudson Project was canceled. He began losing it much earlier, one sentence at a time. Long before the conference room went silent, before the partners closed their folders, before 6 months of work disappeared under a cold corporate decision, Julian had been building something with his own mouth. He just did not know it. He thought he was venting. He thought he was being realistic. He thought he was protecting himself from disappointment by predicting disappointment first. But every morning, every complaint, every bitter little sentence became another brick in a wall he could not see. And by the time he finally saw it, that wall was already standing between him and the life he had prayed for. Julian was 29 years old, living in a narrow Manhattan apartment that looked more impressive from the outside than it felt from the inside. From his balcony, he could see glass towers, yellow taxis, office windows glowing before sunrise, and thousands of people moving through the city as if they all knew exactly where they were going. New York had once looked like promise to him. It had looked like proof that a person could arrive with nothing but talent, hunger, and a notebook full of ideas, and still make something beautiful. When Julian first moved into the city, he used to stand at that same balcony with coffee in one hand and sketches in the other, whispering ideas into the morning air. He imagined schools with more light, hospitals that felt less cold, affordable housing that did not look like punishment, and public spaces where tired people could sit down and remember they were human. Architecture to Julian had never been only about steel and stone. It was about mercy. It was about shaping space in a way that told people they mattered. But that was before the rejections piled up, before the competition he almost won was given to someone with a more powerful last name, before a boutique hotel client praised his concept for 3 months, then vanished when financing collapsed, before a senior architect quietly used one of Julian's ideas in a board presentation and forgot to mention where it came from, before Julian learned that talent did not protect anyone from politics, timing, ego, or disappointment. At first, he was hurt. Then he was angry. Then he became sarcastic. And after a while, sarcasm hardened into a kind of private religion. Every morning, the city woke up beneath him, and Julian gave it his daily confession. The city is draining the life out of me. Nothing ever works out the way it should. I already know this next project is going to fall apart like the others. He did not call those words a confession. He would have laughed if anyone used a spiritual word for something that felt so ordinary. To Julian, he was simply saying what life had taught him. He was naming reality before reality had the chance to embarrass him. If he expected the worst, then maybe the worst could not surprise him. But expectation is never as harmless as we pretend. There is a difference between seeing a storm on the horizon and inviting it to move into your house. Julian did not understand that yet. He did not understand that the words he repeated every morning were teaching his mind what to search for. They were training his emotions to brace instead of build. They were telling his faith to sit down and stay quiet. At Caldwell & Rowe Architects, Julian was still considered one of the most talented younger designers in the firm. People said it carefully now, with a little hesitation, because his gifts were becoming harder to separate from his heaviness. His sketches were still elegant. His models still had a rare sense of proportion. His ideas still carried warmth. But in meetings, he often defeated them before anyone else had the chance. If a partner mentioned a zoning concern, Julian would say the whole thing was probably doomed. If a client asked for revisions, he would mutter that they were only looking for a reason to walk away. If an engineer warned about cost, Julian would assume the budget had already collapsed. He did not notice how often his shoulders sank before the conversation was finished. He did not notice how younger interns stopped bringing him ideas because they expected him to reject them with a tired smile. He did not notice how often his own voice entered a room before his talent did. The Hudson Project was supposed to change all of that. It was a major waterfront redevelopment on the west side, a difficult but beautiful challenge. A neglected industrial building, long abandoned near the river, was to be transformed into a community arts center, public market, and mixed-use space for local businesses. The project had money behind it, media attention around it, and enough complexity to prove whether Julian was ready for leadership. If it succeeded, he would not just receive a promotion. He would recover something he had been losing quietly for years. He would recover trust in himself. At least that was what his mentor at the firm told him when the assignment was given. Julian nodded, politely thanked the partners, and walked out with the file pressed against his chest. For about 7 minutes he felt something almost like hope. Then the old voice rose inside him, familiar and smooth. "Do not get excited. You know how this goes." By the time he reached the elevator, he had already whispered that the project was probably too good to last. Elena Marquez was the first person he told. She was an interior architect at the firm, sharp-minded, loyal, and just as tired as he was. The two of them had become friends during late nights over bad coffee and impossible deadlines. Elena understood the hidden exhaustion of trying to be excellent in a place where excellent people were still replaceable. She could read Julian's face faster than anyone. When he told her about Hudson, she smiled at first. Then, when she saw his expression, her smile faded into the same kind of guarded realism he wore. They told each other the project was a blessing, but they spoke about it like a burden. They discussed the budget as if it were already broken. They discussed the developer as if he were already impossible. They discussed the schedule as if delays had already been carved into stone. By the end of their coffee break, the opportunity had not expanded in Julian's mind. It had shrunk. It had become another trap, another test he expected to fail, another tall building in the distance, casting a shadow over him before he had even taken the first step. The first weeks were demanding, but not disastrous. The site was messy, the structure needed careful review, and the developer's team wanted impressive results without paying for the patient work that impressive results required. Still, Julian's earliest design had power. He preserved the old industrial bones of the building, opened the interior with light wells, and created a central atrium where local vendors, artists, and neighbors could gather. He imagined the river visible from the second level, not as luxury scenery for a few, but as a shared view for everyone who entered. There were moments when he forgot to be negative. He would stand over the model, adjust a wall, study the way sunlight might fall across the main stairs, and for a brief stretch of time, the old Julian returned. The young man who believed spaces could heal people came back into the room. His eyes sharpened, his voice steadied, his hands moved with conviction. Then an email would arrive, or a cost estimate would change, or someone would ask for a shortcut, and Julian would return to the script he knew best. Of course, here it comes. I knew this would happen. The trouble began with a budget reduction, not a small one, a major cut, sudden enough to shake the entire design. The developer claimed market conditions had changed. Financing had tightened. Investors were nervous. The project still needed to look visionary, they said, but it had to cost less. Much less. That was when Julian met Nathaniel Mercer. Nathaniel was the developer's project executive, a man who wore expensive suits as if they were armor. He had a habit of smiling without warmth and using people's first names in a way that felt less like familiarity and more like ownership. He loved pressure because pressure gave him permission to reveal who he really was. In public, he spoke about community impact and urban renewal. In private, he treated every design decision as an obstacle standing between him and profit. Nathaniel did not shout often. He did not need to. He was the kind of man who could make a room feel smaller by lowering his voice. At the first major cost meeting, he praised Julian's concept for exactly 90 seconds. Then he began cutting into it. The local vendor spaces could be reduced. The public staircase could be cheaper. The materials could be swapped for something less durable. The atrium, the heart of the design, could be narrowed. The community workshop rooms could wait for a later phase that everyone in the room knew might never happen. Julian felt each suggestion like a hand closing over the throat of the project. He tried to push back, but he did it with fear in his voice. Instead of saying clearly that certain changes would harm the project, he apologized before explaining. Instead of presenting alternatives with authority, he sounded as if he expected them to be rejected. Nathaniel noticed. Men like Nathaniel always notice where confidence is missing. After the meeting, Julian went to the construction site with Elena and Marcus Hale, the senior field manager assigned to Hudson. Marcus was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, quiet and observant, in a way that made younger people nervous until they realized he was not judging them. He had worked on buildings long enough to know that concrete could lie, steel could hide weakness, and people often revealed the truth by what they repeated under stress. The three of them walked through the old structure while winter light came through broken factory windows. Julian checked notes, took measurements, and stared at the places where Nathaniel's cuts would hurt the design most. Elena tried to encourage him, but her own discouragement came through quickly. "Maybe some people are just lucky," she said quietly. "Maybe other people get assigned the impossible ones." Julian gave a bitter little laugh. He looked at the rusted beams, the cracked floor, the tarps moving in the cold wind, and something in him gave way. He said they were cursed. He said he was always the one who inherited bad luck. He said the project would probably die before spring, and if it did, no one should act surprised. Elena nodded, not because she wanted him to fall, but because she was tired too. Sometimes tired people mistake agreement for comfort. Neither of them noticed Marcus had stopped walking. He waited until Elena went ahead to speak with an engineer. Then he motioned for Julian to follow him toward a quieter corner near the old loading dock. Outside, trucks groaned past the fenced perimeter. Inside, the unfinished building held their voices close. Marcus asked Julian if he knew why buildings stood. Julian almost laughed. It seemed like such a strange question in the middle of a crisis. He gave the answer any architect would give. Foundations, structure, load paths, accurate drawings, good materials, skilled labor, codes followed, and corners not cut. Marcus nodded as if Julian had answered only the first half. Then he told him that no building stood by accident. Before the first beam rose, somebody had drawn what was supposed to exist. Somebody had spoken it into meetings, contracts, schedules, and measurements. Somebody had kept calling it real before it looked real. A building began as a plan, and a plan had to be declared long before it could be touched. Then Marcus looked at Julian with a steadiness that made the young architect uncomfortable. He told him his words were acting like blueprints. Julian smiled the way educated people sometimes smile when they are trying not to offend someone they think is being sentimental. Marcus saw the smile and did not soften. He said, "Scripture teaches that life and death are held in the power of the tongue." Then he told Julian that every time he used his mouth to announce failure, he was not preparing for reality. He was building a permanent address for defeat and moving his furniture in before the door was even hung. The words landed harder than Julian expected. He wanted to dismiss them. He wanted to say budgets were real, contracts were real, pressure was real, and words did not pour concrete or restore funding. But something in him went quiet, not convinced exactly, just pierced. Because Marcus had not accused him of being afraid. Julian already knew he was afraid. Marcus had accused him of building with fear. For the rest of that day, Julian heard his own voice differently. He noticed how quickly he reached for defeat. He noticed how often his sentences began with, "of course," when something went wrong, as if disappointment were a loyal guest he kept inviting back. He noticed that even when good news arrived, he inspected it for hidden cracks. But noticing a habit is not the same as breaking it. The next week, Hudson became harder. A structural report revealed unexpected reinforcement needs in one section of the old building. A city review raised concerns about accessibility, circulation, Nathaniel demanded a revised plan by Friday, then complained when Julian said the timeline was unrealistic. A supplier warned that material costs were rising again. One of the partners at Caldwell & Rowe, Brendan Harker, began hovering over Julian's work with the polite impatience of a man preparing to distance himself from failure. Brendan was not as openly cruel as Nathaniel. He was smoother than that. He believed in reputation more than truth, and he had survived in the firm by always standing near success and stepping away from risk before blame arrived. When Hudson looked promising, Brendan called Julian brilliant in front of the partners. When Hudson began to tremble, Brendan began using phrases like, "your design challenge," and "your budget issue." Julian felt the shift. He had seen it before, and because he expected betrayal, he began acting like a betrayed man before anyone had officially betrayed him. He stopped asking for help early because he assumed no one would give it. He delayed difficult calls because he assumed the answer would be no. He walked into meetings defensive, then left angry that people had treated him as defensive. His words did not cause every problem, but they shaped how he met every problem. They narrowed his field of vision until the only doors he could see were the ones already closing. Elena saw it too, but she was caught in the same weather. The two of them stayed late one night, surrounded by drawings and cold takeout, listing everything that could go wrong. They called it planning. They called it honesty. But by midnight, neither of them had solved anything. They had simply rehearsed disaster until disaster felt more real than the work in front of them. That is the quiet danger of negative speech. It can sound intelligent. It can sound mature. It can sound like the voice of someone who has been hurt and now knows better. But if a person is not careful, pain starts pretending to be wisdom. Fear starts calling itself discernment, and the mouth begins giving instructions to the future that the heart never meant to write. 3 days before the final investor review, Julian discovered a solution. It was not perfect, but it was strong. By preserving more of the existing internal frame, reworking the circulation, and phasing certain non-essential finishes, the Hudson project could keep its public heart without exceeding the reduced budget. The atrium could remain. The workshop rooms could survive. The building would still breathe. For the first time in weeks, Julian felt the old fire return. He worked through the night. Elena helped him refine the interior implications. Marcus reviewed construction feasibility and pointed out 2 practical adjustments that made the plan stronger. By morning, Julian had a revised package that was not only defensible, but beautiful. He should have walked into that investor review with conviction. Instead, fear dressed itself in humility. He began the presentation by apologizing for the challenges. He warned the room that the plan still carried risk. He explained the solution, but his voice kept bending toward defeat, as if he did not want to be accused of overpromising. Nathaniel sat across the table and watched him carefully. Brendan sat beside Julian, silent at first, then began interrupting with softer, vaguer language that made the plan sound less certain. Julian could feel the room slipping away. At one point, Nathaniel asked whether Julian truly believed the revised design could hold under the new budget. It was the moment Julian needed to answer with clarity. It was the moment to stand behind the work, the team, and the purpose of the project. But all the sentences he had practiced in private rose up like smoke. I do not want to pretend this is safe. I cannot guarantee anything. Maybe this project was too ambitious from the beginning. He did not say all of that exactly, but the spirit of it came through. He heard himself qualify the answer until confidence drained out of it. He saw Marcus standing near the back as part of the construction team lower his eyes, not in shame, in grief. Nathaniel smiled. The Hudson project was canceled the following week. Officially, the reason was financial instability and unresolved design risk. Unofficially, everyone knew the investors had lost confidence. Nathaniel blamed the architectural plan. Brendan told the partners that Julian's concept had been inspiring but impractical. The firm moved quickly to protect its client relationships. People spoke gently to Julian, which somehow made it worse. 6 months of work disappeared inside a 38-minute meeting. Julian sat through it without speaking. There was a strange numbness in him, almost peaceful in the most terrible way. Part of him was devastated. Another part whispered that this was exactly what he had predicted, and because he had predicted it, he felt both crushed and confirmed. That is one of the cruelest traps of hopelessness. When the thing you fear finally happens, the pain tells you it was right all along. After the meeting, Julian walked back to his office with the Hudson file in his hand. People avoided his eyes. Elena tried to follow him, but he shook his head. He closed the office door, set the file on the floor, and stood there for several seconds, as if his body had forgotten what to do next. Then he sank down beside the door and covered his face. He did not cry elegantly. There was nothing cinematic about it. He cried like a man who had been holding his breath for years and had finally run out of strength. The shame came first, then anger, then a hollow tiredness so deep it frightened him. He thought about the promotion that would not come. He thought about his rent, his student loans, his parents telling relatives he was doing important work in Manhattan. He thought about the younger version of himself, the one who believed buildings could be acts of mercy, and he wondered when that young man had become someone who expected ruin as a matter of routine. Then he said the words that almost sealed him. He said he was finished. He said he was not meant for good things. He said maybe his life was simply designed to almost succeed and then collapse. The door opened before the last sentence had fully left the room. Marcus stepped in. Julian had no idea how long the older man had been outside. Marcus did not rush toward him with soft comfort. He did not offer a speech about how everything would be fine. He did not pretend the cancellation was small. He looked at the file on the floor, then at Julian, and his face carried both compassion and alarm. He told Julian to stand up and take those words back. Julian stared at him through red eyes, almost offended. He wanted comfort, not correction. He wanted someone to sit beside him and agree that the world had been unfair. And it had been unfair. But Marcus was looking beyond the pain of that moment. He was looking at what Julian was doing with the pain. Julian said he had no strength left to speak positively. Marcus answered that he did not need to lean on his strength. He needed to lean on truth. Then he said something Julian never forgot. He told him not to use his tears as weapons against his own future. That sentence broke through. Because Julian knew in some deep and trembling place that Marcus was right. The grief was real. The loss was real. The disappointment was real. But the sentence he had spoken over himself was not healing anything. It was not telling the truth. It was taking one closed door and calling it a lifetime. It was taking one canceled project and turning it into identity. Marcus did not force him to pretend he was happy. He did not tell him to deny the pain. He simply stood there and waited for Julian to speak a different thing. At first, Julian could barely breathe. Then slowly, with a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else, he said, "The closed door did not mean his life was over. He said this loss could still become part of his rebuilding. He said there might be a bigger door he could not see yet." The words felt weak. They did not rise like thunder. They did not shake the office. They did not bring the Hudson Project back. But something shifted. Not outside him. Not yet. Inside. For the first time in months, Julian had interrupted the sentence of failure before it became permanent. That evening, Marcus walked with him to the subway. He told Julian a little of his own story, not all of it, just enough for Julian to understand that wisdom had cost him something. Years earlier, Marcus had been a young contractor with a growing company, a wife, 2 sons, and a temper that called itself honesty. He had spoken harshly over his home, over his workers, over himself. He had called people useless when they were still learning. He had called his marriage hopeless during a season when it was wounded but not dead. He had called his oldest son a disappointment in a moment of anger. And although forgiveness came later, the memory never stopped hurting. Marcus said words did not control everything, but they planted more than most people admitted. He had learned too late that the tongue could strike before the hand ever moved. It could close a child's spirit, poison a team, shrink a marriage, and train a man to expect only the harvest of bitterness. Then he had learned, through faith and grief and years of repair, that the mouth could also bless. It could steady. It could call courage out of hiding. It could tell the truth without crowning despair as king. Julian listened without interrupting. At the subway entrance, Marcus looked at him and said that tomorrow morning would matter. Not because one morning could fix a life, but because one morning could begin a new pattern. Julian went home exhausted. Manhattan glittered around him with its usual indifference. The city did not know his project had died. It did not lower its volume for his grief. People laughed outside restaurants. Trains ran under the ground. Office lights burned late in towers full of other people's deadlines. Julian stepped into his apartment, dropped his keys on the counter, and felt the old sentences waiting for him like familiar coats by the door. This city is draining the life out of me. Nothing ever works. I am finished. He almost said them. They were ready on his tongue. Instead, he gripped the edge of the kitchen counter and said very quietly that he was still here. It was not poetic. It was not impressive. But it was life. The next morning, Julian stood at the balcony before sunrise. The air was cold and the city below was already moving. His coffee sat untouched beside him. He felt foolish before he even opened his mouth. He had spent years training himself to treat hopeful words as childish, and now he was supposed to speak them into a morning that had not changed. He thought about Marcus. He thought about the Hudson file. He thought about the sentence from Scripture, the one Marcus had repeated with such weight. Life and death in the power of the tongue. Then Julian said today was a good day to begin again. He almost laughed at himself. The words felt too clean for the mess inside him. So he tried again, more honestly. He said he was tired, but he was not abandoned. He said he was disappointed, but he was not destroyed. He said his steps could still be guided. He said he did not have to be behind just because he was being prepared. Nothing dramatic happened. No phone rang. No miracle email appeared. The city did not applaud, but Julian went to work without first cursing the day. That was the first brick removed. The weeks that followed were not easy. This is important to understand because real change rarely arrives like a spotlight. It comes more often like construction behind a fence. Slow, noisy, unbeautiful at first, full of dust delays, and moments when it looks worse before it looks better. Julian still caught himself speaking defeat. Sometimes the words came out before he could stop them. A printer jammed, and he muttered that nothing in his life could function. A partner rescheduled a meeting, and he said he knew they had lost interest. A design review grew tense, and he felt the old sentence rising, "Here we go again." But now he heard it. That was new. He started carrying a small notebook, not for sketches, but for words. On the left side of a page, he wrote what fear wanted him to say. On the right, he wrote what truth allowed him to say instead. He did not write fake, sugary lines. He did not write that everything was perfect, because everything was not perfect. He wrote sentences with enough honesty to stand up under pressure. Fear said, "I always fail." Truth said, "I have failed before, but I am still learning and still moving." Fear said, "No one respects me." Truth said, "I can act with dignity before others recognize it." Fear said, "This delay proves the door is closed." Truth said, "A delay is not a verdict." At first, he felt embarrassed by the notebook. He kept it hidden under project folders. But over time, it became a private construction site. Every corrected sentence felt like removing a damaged beam and replacing it with something that could bear weight. Elena noticed before anyone else. One afternoon, after a difficult client call, she came into his office ready to collapse into their old rhythm. She said the client was impossible, the schedule was ridiculous, and the whole assignment was probably another disaster wearing a different name. Julian almost joined her. The old comfort of shared negativity was strong. There is a strange intimacy in complaining with someone who understands your wounds. But he paused. Then he told her the client was demanding the schedule needed repair and they had to identify the next right move before fear made the decision for them. Elena stared at him as if he had started speaking another language. He smiled a little, not proudly, not perfectly. He told her he was trying something new because the old way had been killing him slowly. That sentence stayed with Elena. She did not change immediately, neither did he. But something between them began to shift. Their conversations no longer ended with both of them buried under the problem. Sometimes one of them would start to spiral, and the other would ask what they could say that was still true but not deadly. It became almost awkwardly practical. Then it became necessary. Meanwhile, Brendan Harker watched Julian's change with skepticism. Brendan had already marked Hudson as a failure attached to Julian's name, and he preferred people to remain inside the categories he assigned them. A discouraged junior architect was easy to manage. A rebuilding one was less convenient. At the next quarterly review, Brendan told Julian that confidence was important, but realism mattered too. He said the partners needed to know Julian could handle pressure without becoming emotionally attached to ideas. The words were polite. The message was sharp. Hudson had damaged him. He would have to earn trust again. Julian felt shame rise in his chest. The old response formed quickly. Of course, they will never let me forget it. I am finished here. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He thanked Brendan for the feedback and asked for specific areas where he could demonstrate readiness. Brendan looked slightly annoyed by the steadiness. He gave vague answers. Julian wrote them down anyway. He left the room with his heart pounding, but he did not curse himself in the elevator. That counted. Sometimes victory is not a promotion, a contract, or a public apology. Sometimes victory is standing in the elevator after being underestimated and refusing to agree with the voice that says they are right about you. Julian began returning to the Hudson file at night. Not because anyone asked him to, not because he expected the project to return. At first he told himself it was for closure. But the more he studied the drawings, the more he realized something important. The revised plan had been stronger than he remembered. It had not been fantasy. It had not been reckless. It had been thoughtful, buildable, and more responsible than the cuts Nathaniel had demanded. That realization hurt. It meant the project had not failed simply because his design was weak. It meant other forces had been at work, financing games investor, fear, reputation management, and Nathaniel's refusal to protect the mission he had praised in public. But it also meant Julian had not defended the work with the strength it deserved. He did not use that truth to punish himself. That was another new thing. He let it instruct him. Marcus helped him review the file one Saturday morning at the empty office. The older man brought black coffee and a yellow legal pad. Together they went through the plan, not as mourners, but as builders. Marcus pointed out where the phasing could be clearer. Julian refined the budget notes. They identified materials that could preserve warmth without pretending money did not matter. They talked through how to present design value in language investors understood without surrendering the soul of the work. At one point, Julian admitted that he felt foolish working on something dead. Marcus said, "Some seeds look buried before they look planted." Julian wrote that in his notebook. By spring, people in the firm began to notice that Julian's presence felt different. He was not louder. He was not falsely cheerful. He did not walk through the office throwing inspirational phrases at exhausted coworkers. If anything, he became quieter. But his quiet had changed. It no longer felt like defeat. It felt like he was listening for the next right thing. He still had bad days. On one of them, a small residential client rejected 3 weeks of revisions and asked for a direction painfully close to what Julian had suggested at the beginning. He went into the stairwell, sat on the steps, and pressed both hands over his face. The old anger came back hot. He wanted to say clients were impossible, his work did not matter, and God must have misplaced his address. Instead, he breathed until the first wave passed. Then he said he was frustrated, but frustration would not be his architect. He said he could respond with clarity. He said this problem had an answer, even if he did not see it yet. He went back upstairs and wrote a better email than the one his anger had drafted. That too counted. One evening, Elena found him in the materials library comparing samples for a healthcare renovation. She had been crying, though she tried to hide it. A director had dismissed her concept in front of a client, then later suggested one of her ideas as if it had been his. The old Elena would have turned it into a prophecy. She would have said that people like them were invisible, and always would be. This time she looked at Julian and asked what truth sounded like when the room had just lied about you. He did not answer quickly. That was another sign of growth. He no longer treated encouragement as something to throw cheaply at pain. He told her the room had been unfair and she should document what happened. He told her invisibility in one meeting did not erase the value of her work. He told her they would prepare a clear record, not a bitter one. Then he said the sentence Marcus had given him in a different form. They would not let someone else's dishonesty become the blueprint for their future. Elena wiped her face and nodded. That night they stayed late, not to complain, but to prepare. They gathered dated sketches, email threads, and notes. Elena requested a follow-up meeting calmly. The director did not apologize, but he became careful. And for Elena, careful was the beginning of a boundary. Julian began to understand that speaking life was not the same as staying silent about wrong. It was not weakness. It was not denial. It did not mean smiling while people took advantage of you. It meant refusing to let pain write the final sentence. It meant telling the truth in a way that still left room for God to move, room for wisdom to act, and room for the future to be more than a repetition of the past. By the beginning of summer, 6 months after Hudson died, Julian had changed enough that even his mornings sounded different. He still stood on the balcony. The same traffic moved below. The same sirens cut through the distance. The same city demanded more than it gave. But Julian no longer began by accusing the day. He would say this was a day he had been given, not a day sent to defeat him. He would say his steps were guided. He would say his work had purpose. He would say he was not forgotten. And on days when those sentences felt too high for his heart to reach, he would say the simplest true thing he could find. He would say he was still willing. That summer morning, the email arrived at 8:17. It came from the executive office asking Julian to join an urgent meeting at 10. The subject line mentioned Stonebridge Community Trust, a national development foundation known for projects that combined housing, public space, and neighborhood investment. Julian read the message twice. Stonebridge was not one of Caldwell and Rowe's usual clients. They were larger, more selective, and careful with their partnerships. His first instinct was fear. Urgent meeting. Executive office. This cannot be good. Then he caught it. He stood in his kitchen with his phone in his hand and spoke out loud before the old script could settle. He said he did not know what the meeting meant, but he would walk into it prepared and steady. He said not every summons was a threat. He said good news was allowed to find him. The last sentence surprised him. Good news was allowed to find him. He wrote it in the notebook before leaving for work. At 10 o'clock, Julian entered the largest conference room at the firm. Brendan Harker was already there, along with 2 senior partners, the managing director, Elena, and a few members of the business development team. Marcus stood near the far wall, invited as a construction consultant, though Julian did not yet know why. On the other side of the table sat 3 visitors from Stonebridge, including their president, Lydia Stone. Lydia was in her early 50s, composed, direct, and not easily impressed. She had the calm of someone who had sat through too many polished presentations to be dazzled by adjectives. In front of her was a folder Julian recognized before he wanted to. Hudson. For a second the room tilted. Brendan began smoothly explaining that Hudson had been an ambitious but ultimately suspended redevelopment effort. He used the kind of language people use when they want failure to sound like weather. Market constraints, alignment challenges, financial pressures. He described Caldwell and Rowe's continuing commitment to community-centered design and suggested that the firm had learned valuable lessons. Julian listens as his own work was turned into a cautionary tale with rounded edges. Then Lydia asked who had led the revised preservation plan in the final month before cancellation. Brendan paused. It was brief, but everyone felt it. He said the firm had worked collaboratively. Lydia looked down at the folder. Then she said Julian Vance's name. The room became very still. She explained that Stonebridge had been studying abandoned industrial redevelopment models in New York. One of their advisors had obtained public planning materials from the Hudson proposal, then later reviewed supplemental documents from a former investor. The original concept had interested them, but the final revised package had impressed them. It had preserved public value under severe budget pressure without sacrificing safety or dignity. Julian felt his pulse in his hands. Brendan recovered quickly. He smiled and said Julian had contributed meaningful design work under firm guidance. Nathaniel Mercer's name came up next because his company had been involved in the Hudson cancellation. Brendan described the decision as unfortunate but understandable. Lydia did not smile. She said Stonebridge's concern was not that Hudson had been canceled. Projects were canceled every day. Their concern was why certain recommendations had been ignored, why cost warnings had been selectively shared, and why a community-focused design had been labeled impractical, while more profitable private use alternatives were discussed behind closed doors. No one spoke. Then Lydia opened another folder. The documents inside were not dramatic in appearance. No one gasped at the sight of them. They were emails, meeting notes, marked up budgets, and internal summaries. Ordinary papers. But ordinary papers can carry extraordinary weight when they tell the truth someone tried to bury. Lydia explained that Nathaniel Mercer had pushed investors to reject Julian's revised plan, while privately exploring a stripped-down version of the site with reduced public access. He had described community space as decorative burden. He had written that the architect could be blamed for design overreach if the deal needed to be repositioned. In one email, he had referred to Julian's own visible discouragement as useful because it made the project's failure easier to sell. The words Nathaniel had spoken in private now stood in public record. That was the first piece of poetic justice. The man who had used Julian's uncertainty as a weapon was now exposed by his own tongue. But Lydia was not finished. She turned to Brendan and asked why Julian's authorship had been minimized in the firm's final internal report, even though his revised plan was the very portion Stonebridge found most valuable. Brendan's face tightened. He spoke about leadership structure, documentation practices, and the complexity of collaborative work. His sentences became longer as their meaning became thinner. Julian looked down at the table. A year earlier, he would have disappeared inside that moment. He would have let shame speak for him. He would have assumed the room had already decided he was small. He would have cursed the meeting before it was over. But he had been practicing for this. Not for this exact room, not for this exact reveal, but for the kind of pressure that asks a person to agree with their old identity. He lifted his head. He did not attack Brendan. He did not perform outrage. He spoke calmly about the Hudson plan, the constraints, the phasing strategy, and the choices he believed protected the project's purpose. He acknowledged what he would do differently now. He said he would communicate risk without surrendering conviction. He said the design had never been about preserving his ego. It had been about preserving the public heart of the building. Marcus watched him from the wall, and his eyes shone. Lydia listened without interrupting. Then she revealed why Stonebridge had come. They had acquired rights to pursue a new project on a larger waterfront site, one with similar industrial bones but greater public funding and stronger neighborhood partnership. They were calling it Harbor House. They needed an architectural team that understood adaptive reuse, community access, and the moral difference between making a building look generous and making it function generously. Then she said they wanted Julian to lead the concept phase. Not Brendan, not a nameless firm committee. Julian. The room did not erupt. Real life rarely erupts at the exact moment you think it should. Instead, silence deepened until it felt like everyone was measuring the size of what had just happened. Brendan tried once more. He suggested that someone with more senior experience should be positioned as the public lead, with Julian supporting design development. It sounded reasonable, unless you knew what fear smelled like in a conference room. Lydia said Stonebridge was willing to work with Caldwell and Rowe, but only if Julian's leadership role was formal, documented, and client-facing. She said their board was not looking for a perfect architect. They were looking for one who had already wrestled with pressure and learned to protect the mission anyway. Julian felt emotion rise so quickly he had to look away. For months he had thought the Hudson file was a tombstone. All that time, it had also been a seed. After the meeting, Brendan left quickly. The managing director stayed behind, suddenly warm, suddenly full of praise, suddenly careful to use Julian's name. Elena hugged him in the hallway and laughed through tears. Marcus waited until the crowd thinned. He asked Julian if he understood what had happened. Julian said he thought so. The work had been seen. Marcus nodded. Then he said the work had been seen, but so had the man doing the work. Not the defeated man from the office floor. Not the man who buried his future under curses. The man who had learned to stand up, tell the truth, and speak life without pretending life was easy. Julian could not answer for a moment. He looked through the glass wall of the conference room at the city beyond it. Manhattan was still loud, still expensive, still difficult. Nathaniel had still lied. Brendan had still minimized him. Hudson was still canceled. Nothing about the past had magically become painless, but it had been redeemed. There is a difference. Redemption does not always erase the wound. Sometimes it gives the wound a job. It turns what almost destroyed you into the place where wisdom enters. It takes the file you thought was evidence against you and makes it evidence for a future you could not imagine when you were crying on the floor. Harbor House did not become easy simply because Julian had been chosen. In some ways, the pressure grew. Stonebridge asked hard questions. Community leaders challenged assumptions. Engineers pushed back on design details. Budgets still had limits. Permits still moved slowly. The construction world did not become gentle because Julian had learned to speak differently. But Julian was different. When difficulties came, he no longer treated them as confirmation that he was cursed. He treated them as problems requiring wisdom. When a community board meeting grew tense, he did not leave saying everyone hated the project. He reviewed concerns, clarified the design, and returned with better answers. When cost estimates rose, he did not announce disaster. He gathered the team and asked what could be adjusted without betraying the purpose. When fear whispered that he would lose this project too, he opened the notebook and answered with truth. One of the most powerful moments came during a public meeting in a school gymnasium near the new site. Residents were tired of developers promising community benefits and delivering private profit. They had heard beautiful language before. They had seen renderings full of sunlight, trees, and smiling families, only to watch buildings rise that did not welcome them. An older woman stood and asked Julian why anyone should trust this project. The room waited. Julian could have hidden behind technical language. He could have oversold. He could have made promises beyond his control. Instead, he spoke with the steadiness of a man who had learned that words mattered too much to waste them. He said trust would not be earned by one speech. It would be earned by drawings that matched commitments budgets, that protected public space, and meetings where concerns were not treated as obstacles. He said the community deserved more than inspiring language. It deserved follow-through. Then he said Harbor House would not be perfect, but it would be honest, and he was willing to be held accountable for the part he had been given to lead. The room did not become easy, but it changed. Afterward, Lydia told him that was why Stonebridge had chosen him. Not because he sounded flawless, but because he had stopped using uncertainty as an excuse to speak carelessly. Elena joined the Harbor House team as the interior lead. Her own voice changed too. She still had her sharp humor, still saw problems quickly, still refused false optimism, but she no longer called herself unlucky as if it were a birth certificate. She began mentoring younger designers with the same lesson she had learned the hard way. Tell the truth, but do not let fear write it for you. Brendan remained at the firm for a while, but his influence changed. Once Stonebridge required transparent authorship and documented leadership roles, the old habit of absorbing younger people's work became harder to hide. Other designers began naming their contributions more clearly. The managing director, under pressure from both clients and staff, introduced new project credit protocols. It was not a complete transformation of the firm. Workplaces do not become healthy overnight because one meeting exposed one pattern. But a door opened. Nathaniel Mercer's consequences were sharper. Stonebridge's review triggered further investigation among investors tied to the Hudson site. His private emails, the very words he had trusted to closed circles, became evidence of bad faith. He lost the Harbor House opportunity before he ever truly had it. Later, his company removed him from community redevelopment projects altogether. Julian heard the news from someone else. He did not celebrate loudly. There had been a time when he would have wanted Nathaniel humiliated in public, wanted him cornered, wanted him to feel small. But by then, Julian understood something better than revenge. A person eventually meets the harvest of the words they have planted. Nathaniel had spoken contempt behind polished language, and contempt had answered him. Brendan had spoken praise when it benefited him, and erasure when it protected him, and eventually people learned to read the gap. Julian had spoken death over himself for years, and he had lived under the shadow of those sentences until grace taught him how to stop agreeing with them. The lesson was not that words were magic. Julian knew better than that now. Words did not replace planning. Words did not pay invoices, solve structural problems, or make dishonest people honest. He still had to work. He still had to prepare. He still had to listen, revise, apologize, learn, and keep going when his body was tired. But words did something foundational. They aimed him. They told his mind what to notice. They told his courage whether to rise or retreat. They told his faith whether it was allowed to breathe. They shaped the posture from which he entered the room, answered the email, made the call, and faced the setback. Words were not the whole building, but they were part of the blueprint. A year after Hudson was canceled, Julian stood on another construction site, this one alive with motion. Harbor House was still in its early stages, but the old structure had been cleaned, reinforced, and opened to light. Steel rose where decay had been. Workers moved through the frame with purpose. Community representatives walked the site with hard hats and cautious hope. Marcus, officially retired, but unofficially impossible to keep away, stood beside Julian near the future central hall. The space was not finished, not even close. It was dust, echoes, scaffolding, and promise. Julian loved it. He looked up at the beams and remembered the first Hudson site, the cold wind, the broken windows, the sentence he had spoken about being cursed. He remembered Marcus stopping him near the loading dock. He remembered the office floor. He remembered the first awkward morning on the balcony, when all he could say was that he was still here. Marcus asked him what he saw. Julian said he saw a building learning to stand. Marcus smiled and said that was not all. Julian looked again. This time he saw more than construction. He saw evidence. Not evidence that life was easy, or that faith prevented pain, or that good people never lost things. He saw evidence that a person could be rebuilt. He saw that what had once felt like delay had become preparation. He saw that one canceled project had not canceled his calling. He saw that the wall he had built with fear had not been stronger than the grace that taught him to remove it. Brick by brick, sentence by sentence, one morning at a time. At the Harbor House groundbreaking ceremony, Lydia invited Julian to speak. He kept his remarks short because he had learned not to use too many words when the right ones would do. He honored the community. He thanked the team. He named the workers, the planners, the designers, and the residents who had challenged them to make the project better. Then, near the end, he paused. He said, "Buildings begin long before anyone sees them. They begin in what people are willing to imagine. Protect, fund, draw, correct, and speak into existence." He said they were standing there because many people had chosen to speak commitment where neglect had spoken abandonment. He did not tell the full story of his own balcony, his own bitterness, his own office floor. Not there, not in detail. But Marcus knew, Helena knew, and Julian knew. That evening, after the ceremony, Julian returned to his apartment. The view from the balcony was the same one he had looked at for years, but he was not the same man looking. The city still had teeth. It still took effort to live there. It still pressed against people with noise, ambition, expense, and speed. But it no longer looked like an enemy assigned to drain him. It looked like a place where he had been tested. It looked like a place where he was being rebuilt. He stood outside as the last light faded between the towers. For a moment, he remembered the sentences he used to say. They sounded strange to him now, like voices from an old room he no longer lived in. This city is draining the life out of me. Nothing ever works out. I am not meant for good things. He did not hate the man who had said those words. That was important. He understood him. That man had been wounded. That man had been tired. That man had been trying to survive disappointment the only way he knew how. Julian did not need to despise his former self in order to grow beyond him. He simply did not need to obey him anymore. So Julian spoke into the evening. He said his life was still being built. He said his work would carry light. He said closed doors could become direction. He said he was not forgotten. He said he would speak life, not because every day felt good, not because every project would succeed, not because he could control every outcome with a sentence, but because his tongue had been trusted with power and he no longer wanted to use that power against himself. There are people who will hear Julian's story and think the lesson is too simple. They will say words are small compared to money, opportunity, injustice, grief, and failure. And in one sense, they are right. A sentence cannot replace a paycheck. A declaration cannot erase a diagnosis. A hopeful phrase cannot undo betrayal, rebuild a company, or bring back what was lost. But that is not the question. The question is not whether words are the only force in a life. The question is whether they are one of the forces. And deep down, most of us know they are. We know because we still remember words spoken over us years ago. A teacher's careless sentence, a parent's anger, a friend's encouragement, a rejection that sounded final, a blessing that gave us courage when we had none. Words enter places hands cannot reach. They linger, they echo, they shape what we believe is possible, and the words we speak over ourselves can become the walls we live inside. Some people wake up every day and curse their own future before breakfast. They call themselves failures before the work begins. They announce that nothing good ever happens to them, then walk through the day looking for proof. They say they are too old, too late, too broken, too unlucky, too ordinary, too far behind. They call it honesty because pain has trained them to distrust hope. But honesty does not require hopelessness. You can admit you are tired without declaring you are finished. You can acknowledge disappointment without naming yourself a failure. You can grieve a closed door without announcing that every door is closed. You can bring your weakness to God without turning weakness into your identity. That was the truth Julian had to learn. He did not learn to deny pain. He learned to stop crowning it. He did not learn to pretend setbacks were blessings in disguise the moment they happened. He learned to leave room for redemption. He did not learn to speak empty positivity. He learned to speak life with tears still on his face. And that is where the real power was. Because the first new sentence did not come when he felt strong. It came when he was on the floor. It came when Hudson was gone. It came when his old voice had every reason to claim victory. That was where Marcus challenged him to stand up and withdraw the death sentence he had spoken over himself. Sometimes the most important words you will ever say are not the ones you say when everything is going well. They are the words you say when the evidence looks bad. They are the words you say when the meeting ends, the door closes, the money runs short, the relationship breaks, the diagnosis comes, the opportunity disappears, and the old fear leans close to your ear with a familiar script. That is the moment when the tongue becomes a tool or a weapon. Julian had spent years using his mouth like a hammer against his own hope. Then slowly he learned to use it like a builder uses a level, a line, a plan. He learned to ask whether his words were helping him stand straight or teaching him to collapse. He learned that every sentence carried direction. Some words build fear. Some words build endurance. Some words build shame. Some words build faith. Some words lock a person inside what happened yesterday. And some words open a window toward what grace can still do tomorrow. Julian did not become perfect. He did not become immune to discouragement. Years later, he would still have mornings when anxiety reached him before sunlight did. He would still have projects that ran late, clients who changed their minds, plans that needed revision, and private moments when old thoughts knocked on the door. But now, he knew he did not have to invite them in and give them the master bedroom. He could answer differently. He could say, "This is hard, but I am not alone." He could say, "I made a mistake, but I am still teachable." He could say, "I lost something, but I have not lost my future." He could say, "I do not see the way yet, but my steps can still be guided." He could say, "I am being rebuilt." And over time, those words did what words often do. They made room for action. They made room for courage. They made room for wise counsel, better preparation, honest boundaries, and renewed faith. They did not float above reality. They entered reality and helped Julian meet it with a different spirit. That is how a life is rebuilt most of the time. Not all at once. Not with one emotional breakthrough that fixes every pattern, but brick by brick, morning by morning, correction by correction. A person notices the sentence they were about to speak, stops, breathes, and chooses one that does not betray their future. Then they do it again, and again, and again, until one day they look around and realize the wall they thought would always imprison them has lost whole sections. Light is coming through places that used to be sealed. Julian once believed his future depended only on drawings, contracts, budgets, and chance. He was not entirely wrong. Those things mattered. They still do. But he learned that the future is also shaped in quieter places, in kitchens before sunrise, in stairwells after criticism, in offices after failure, in the small space between pain and the sentence pain wants to say next. That space can change a life, because in that space, a person chooses whether to speak death or life. Julian Vance had spoken death long enough to know its architecture. He knew how it narrowed hallways, lowered ceilings, blocked windows, and made every room feel smaller. He knew how it turned opportunity into threat and delay into doom. He knew how it could make a gifted man live like his own enemy. But he also came to know the architecture of life. Life made room. Life opened windows. Life told the truth without surrendering hope. Life corrected mistakes without destroying identity. Life allowed grief to speak, but refused to let grief become God. Life gave Julian the courage to stand in rooms where he had once shrunk, to defend work he once apologized for, and to receive good news without suspicion. In the end, Hudson was not the project that built Julian's career. It was the project that exposed his foundation. Harbor House became the project that rose after the repair. And Marcus, with his quiet wisdom, had been right from the beginning. A building needs a blueprint before it stands. So does a life. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we draw with our words. We sketch defeat or courage. We frame fear or faith. We lay bricks of bitterness or hope. Julian had once used his words to build a wall between himself and the future he wanted. Then he learned to take that wall down, one sentence at a time. And from that day forward, whenever he stood over a new design, whenever he walked through a construction site, whenever he faced another hard meeting or another uncertain morning, he remembered the lesson that had rescued him from his own mouth. Life and death were not abstract ideas floating somewhere far away. They were close as the tongue, as close as the next sentence. So Julian chose carefully. He chose to speak life. He chose to speak hope. He chose to speak faith. And slowly, faithfully, with truth in his mouth and courage in his hands, Julian Vance built again.